Aloha! This is Kenny Wilson. You've just found yourself in K-Dub's place. We got some action here tonight, which is April 10th, 2016. And get yourself comfortable. Have a drink if you like. And we're going to start it out with our theme song for this outing. This little thing from an album called A Series of Dreams by Kenny Wilson. And it's all about the sound of music. Yeah.
It may be thunder, it may be rain, but the sound of music is all that I hear. And I may be laughing, or it may be pain, the sound of music is all that I hear. I carry the candle that leads to the night, and sometimes I feel that the time is right, but I may be mistaken and really not here. And the sound of music is all that I hear. I may be burning in ashes of truth, and the sound of music is all that I hear. And this always happens when I'm next to you. The sound of music is all that I hear. Wherever I wander, whoever I love, whenever I'm dreaming of heaven above, there's always a beauty that comes to my ear. And the sound of music is all that I hear. The sound of music is all that I hear. The sound of music is all that I hear. Yeah. All right, let's go.
Hey, alright then. Welcome back. Tonight's reading from the book entitled It Seemed Like a Good Idea at the Time, The Real-Life Antics of a 20th Century Kid. We're going to go get away from some of that period of time, like the other stories where when I was trying to like be an adult and stuff like that. That didn't work out so good. Anyway, we're going to go back now to early days, early Los Angeles days in the 50s, and I don't know, I guess I sort of start remembering stuff around when I was 5, maybe certain music a little earlier, but about 5, I think. And this will be coming because of that from the mind of a memory, or the mind of a 5 to 8 or 9-year-old little kid. So, I'm just doing the best I can as far as remembering how these things all played out. But let's, going back to the early 60s here, or late 50s, early 60s, let's have a little historical overview here before we creep into personal things. Okay, so it's mid-50s. Pop culture was pretty much defined not only in the US but around the world by the lives of two Americans during this time. Elvis Presley and Marilyn Monroe became the ambassadors of cool here, there, and everywhere. Rock and roll was gaining a foothold in the pop music charts and in the hearts and minds of all Americans. In the early 60s, some of the great events in cinema, along with some of my favorite movies, came to the silver screen, including Lawrence of Arabia, West Side Story, To Kill a Mockingbird, and as well as Ben-Hur a few years earlier. Around the world, freedom was becoming a main topic of conversation as well as a primary plan of action. Some were gaining it, some were losing it. The colonization of a large part of the planet by the old-school European powers, mainly England, France, Spain, and Portugal, was coming to an end. In 1960, it seemed like the entire continent of Africa was gaining its political independence, from France primarily. Oh yeah, I forgot about South Africa. Well, that would come in the not-too-distant future. But with freedom would come instability in many cases, which led to a lot of civil wars and violent overthrows. The African community became a cauldron of unrest for many years after. As the 50s became the 60s, Cuba became a major player in global affairs, particularly as they related to what we refer to as the Cold War. At the end of 1956, Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, and their pals landed on the shores of that great island nation and began their invasion and subsequent overthrow of the existing government. In 1959, Castro became the premier of Cuba and began nationalizing everything in sight and declared socialism to be the order of the day. Of course, this led to most of the free world isolating them from commerce and diplomatic relations, and to the Soviet Union getting a foothold in the Western Hemisphere, bringing their communist ways to the doorstep of the Americas. The Pope even excommunicated Castro during this period of time. In 1961, a group of expatriates led and trained by our very own CIA appeared at the Bay of Pigs like a bunch of Keystone cops and tried in vain to invade and conquer their homeland. No wonder that Castro took Khrushchev up on his offer to deliver Soviet missiles to Cuba the following year. Of course, we couldn't let that happen, so in October of 1962, Kennedy and Khrushchev precipitated what is referred to as the Cuban Missile Crisis. What apparently happened is that our reconnaissance planes, or satellites, took some pictures that revealed missile bases just waiting for the Soviet missiles. Kennedy ordered a naval blockade, and supposedly Khrushchev backed down and the missiles went home. What wasn't mentioned very loudly at the time was that Kennedy had to promise to remove our missiles from Turkey in exchange. So World War III was delayed for a little while anyway. Of course, Cuba was not the only nation that the Soviets had their eyes on. Since the Second World War, they had taken control of and brought Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Hungary, and East Germany behind the Iron Curtain. Albania had something to do with all of this as well, but for some reason or other, they jumped over to China's side in 1960. I could never quite figure out what Albania was up to over the years. They did have a funny role in the Wag the Dog movie, though. Anyway, the Red Scare led to many Americans building bomb shelters in their backyards. I even got to go in one once. That's right. When I visited the Stewards in Torrance and went next door where their neighbors had built one, just waiting for the bombs to drop. It seemed like a great place to have a secret club of some kind. Another byproduct of the Cold War was what they call the space race, in which the US and Soviets tried to outdo each other in the quest for space travel. We may have gotten on the moon first, but they clearly had the upper hand at the beginning. With all the rockets and satellites and space vehicles taking off from Earth, it got confusing at times as to who was doing what, but it seemed like the Soviets had a better record of success back then. And maybe we just didn't hear about their failures. It seemed like we kept blowing things up in crashing probes. We even dropped an atom bomb. No shit. We even dropped an atom bomb, accidentally I hope, on a house in South Carolina. Fortunately, fission did not occur. Anyway, the speed at which technology started evolving was mind-boggling. It seems like records were being set every day for the fastest and the furthest. It was quite exciting. Of that you can be sure. And once the 60s hit town, everything seemed to take off into new frontiers. Here at home, we had our own problems to deal with. One of them was a clown named Joe McCarthy who somehow got hold of a very loud microphone and started calling everyone, other than his family and favorite cronies, a communist. That went on for most of 1954 in the United States Senate, where he had a home for a while. And in the middle of all this communist hysteria and thumping of the Bible, someone came up with the bright idea of adding "under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance in the summer of '54. The pledge had existed since the late 19th century without that in it, and it was working just fine. Unfortunately, the "under God" thing still exists to this day, but fortunately, the U.S. Senate formally condemned McCarthy later that year, and I don't remember hearing from him again. Good riddance. Of course, the civil rights issues, especially as they affected the African American population in this country, were coming to a head. Lynchings were still going on in the South. Blacks still couldn't ride like everyone else on the buses. Voter discrimination was still widespread, and the list goes on. But many had started fighting back, and even though we still have a long way to go before claiming a complete victory, the civil rights movement was taking hold and would continue to improve the lives of minorities throughout the land from then to the present day. Fortunately, the Supreme Court was on our side in those days. Okay, let's wind down this little historical overview with some good stuff. Both Alaska and Hawaii became admitted as states in 1959. As a matter of fact, my future home of Hawaii was admitted on my birthday that year, something I always felt good about. Ringo joined the Beatles in August of '62. Leave It to Beaver started airing in '57. The Frisbee came to be in '57. Natasha Kinski was born in 1960, and Magic Johnson was born in 1959. Christmas was always a big deal around our place. We had the lights outside, we had the lights inside. I don't think I ever saw snow firsthand until we got back east, but it didn't matter to me because we'd always have this big white snowy tree for our picture window. Yeah, a white tree. I always loved those trees. Multitude of ornaments hung majestically over their boughs. Our routine was to do Christmas Eve with the relatives and then casually roll into Christmas morning for the big rewards. I'm pretty sure Christmas Eve was always at our place until we split town. It seems like it was the Wilsons, the Fleemans, the Paynes, the Stewards, and the Macmillans all crammed into that little room. Actually, I guess everyone was everywhere until Santa arrived. However, there was one door that always seemed to be out of bounds, and for a long while, I was never sure why. Yeah, it was a grand old time. Food everywhere, especially sweet things. Certain members of the adult crowd would get sloshed. Mitch Miller's Christmas album was probably on the box. And then, when you thought it couldn't get any better, the doorbell would ring. Yeah. And where are we? Some would grab the door. Oh, yeah. Oh, and then, when you thought it couldn't get any better, the doorbell would ring. Someone would grab the door, in would walk, yep, the headliner, the reason we were all there, the baddest ass white bearded son of a gun that ever walked the rooftops in L.A. And to think that he was going to make 2 appearances at our place. Anyway, Santa was just too perfect. I mean, he just looked like Santa Claus in every possible way. He carried a gigantic bag filled with toys and things for, I think, everyone. Maybe just the kids, but I think grown-ups might have gotten some stuff too. Of course, with all the people there was a lot of exchanging gifts earlier, but the big finale was definitely the ho-ho-ho of it all. After Santa did his thing, which of course included multiple photo opportunities, he split the scene and things would start to wind down. The relatives would shortly thereafter start disappearing. We, the Wilsons and Grandpa Gibble, would hang out a little while after the big blowout, but still being quite young, I'd have to hit the sack so that I could fully enjoy the events of the next morning, which pretty much meant tearing in all that stuff under the tree. What bliss. Anyway, getting back to this Santa Claus thing, it really had me going for a while. I don't remember the exact year that my life changed as a result of all the confusion, but I do remember the moment it came crashing down on my little head. I had the desire to get away from the crowd one Christmas Eve, so I started wandering through the empty parts of the house. I finally came to this door that always seemed to be locked at a certain time each year. Just for the hell of it, I decided to try to twist the doorknob just to see if everything was still in play. To my bewilderment, the door began to open slowly. As the opening widened, I first saw brothers Don and Steve trying to get something on someone. And then I knew what was going on. There was my dad, halfway into what was quite obviously a Santa Claus outfit. I didn't know what to say. I still have a hard time figuring out what it all meant. To this day, there it was. The end of my childhood. They thought it was hilarious, of course, and I'm sure I had to vow allegiance to the keeping of the secret. And as I walked away down the hall in a daze, it started to occur to me that Dad was never the one who would answer the door when it rang on those evenings. Of course, he wasn't around, or so I thought, for the photos either. I don't even think he needed padding for the suit. He was shaped perfectly for the job. I often wondered where that Santa's suit ended up, but as I was taking a break from my typing here, I was discussing it with my cousin Jim, and he said that they had it at their house in Torrance. He said it had been used by some big guy who was a friend of the family, who couldn't quite fit into it properly. He said that the guy got into the shirt-coat part all right, but that he was pouring out of the rest of it. My dad was shaped rather strangely, had the belly for it, but was not exactly that big otherwise. To wind down the Christmas portion of this story, let me say that I always have loved the music that went down the Christmas portion. Jeez, cats, excuse me. Speaking of music, I guess it's time I start discussing its importance in my life. I'm pretty sure that I remember certain songs earlier than I remember other stuff. Like I said, there was always music around the house. There were sing-along, choral group stuff, like Mitch Miller, Ray Conniff singers, etc. Commercial folk group kind of stuff. Kingston Trio, New Christy Minstrels, etc. Some classical stuff, Christmas stuff during that time of year, pop rock from the radio, Elvis, Buddy Holly, Everly Brothers, Frankie Avalon, Connie Francis, Pat Boone, etc. Show tunes, Broadway musicals, movie themes, etc. Not much real rock and roll and no real jazz that I recall, at least up to that point. The Beatles hadn't happened yet, but one of the greatest musical influences of my life, along with the Beatles and Beethoven's Night, has been the soundtrack to West Side Story. To this day, I believe it's the greatest musical work of the 20th century. Although he had a lot of great compositions in his life, I see this as Leonard Bernstein's masterpiece. More on my think about that movie in a bit. When I was about 5 years old, it was decided that I should take piano lessons like my brothers before me. Her name eludes me at the moment, but my piano teacher was a nice old gal that I think taught all four of us at one time or another. I did it for a couple of years. Got pretty good at the theme from Exodus, theme from A Summer Place, a thing called Vespers that I liked, and a simplified version of Ludwig van's Moonlight Sonata. However, I didn't have a very commendable attention span, nor did I like to practice. Still don't. Plus, the teacher wasn't exactly a whole lot of fun. The lessons kind of taught me to read music, but by the time I took up the piano again when I was about 16 or so, I did not apply the reading of music much in my day-to-day playing of the instrument. I had picked up the guitar by then, and I generally started playing the piano by ear, pretty much just pounding out chords and singing along. Anyway, when I was about 7 or 8, I stopped with the piano lessons, joined the orchestra at school, and became the percussionist for a while. That meant timpani, bells, triangle, stuff like that. It's funny, when we went back to Virginia, there was band class, or just band. Usually there were a handful of trumpets, a couple of trombones, maybe a couple of clarinets, maybe a sax, but usually not. You get the picture? At the 74th Street School, this is elementary school, remember, in LA, there was a full-on orchestra with violins, cellos, oboes, French horns, a pianist, and all the usual stuff. Of course, when we got back to Virginia, our handwriting sucked. There were a lot of differences in the public school systems of both places. So, from before I can remember, music always enthralled me and came easy to me, in terms of understanding how it all moved and intertwined, how harmony, especially vocal harmony, was layered, how a melody could work itself around certain kinds of chords, how that same melody over a different set of chords could still yield pleasant but different results, how many different rhythms existed, how song lyrics were far different from your usual poetry, and all the basic stuff involved with applying these beautiful sounds to instruments and or human voices. Throughout my life, this music and this contemplation of music would serve as both a blessing and a curse. I'm sure you understand the blessing part, but I imagine the curse part might not be fathomable to most of you. I'll delve into that topic from time to time throughout this story. Where were we? Oh, I guess my first experience in public singing would have been in the church choir. I was still real young, so I doubt that I got many of the tougher, cool songs to sing. I seem to recall, Jesus loves me, this I know, 'cause the Bible tells me so. Yeah, I did that one, stuff like that. It was alright, I was just passing through anyway. Instrumentally speaking, I had those piano lessons, did the orchestral thing at school, switched over to trumpet when I got back to Virginia. Got a drum set around the 7th grade, picked up an acoustic guitar and a book of Beatles chords a couple of years later than that. Picked up the piano again at some point and started putting them all together on recordings when I got out of high school. But I feel I'm getting ahead of myself. Back to LA. As for myself, I'm sure I had many visions of greatness when it came to visualizing the future, but I don't think anything had really locked in when I was 5 to 9 years old. As much as I loved and felt totally comfortable with this world of music, I don't think I actually saw myself as a professional musician. That probably didn't happen until I was about 13 when I saw the Beatles. But at the time, my mind was racing in multiple directions. My dad hadn't been elected to Congress yet, and his political status as an assemblyman didn't seem quite as glamorous to me as it was about to become once he got the big enchilada. But I imagine I was affected by all kinds of occupational activities.
All the time lost and all the time saved is nothing